Next is Wilson's foreign policy. We've dealt with the domestic issues, with the triple wall of privilege and so forth, and now we need to get into his foreign policy, because that really is going to define his tenure as president. Not necessarily his first term, but his second term was certainly defined by foreign policy. So, Wilson is not a fan at all of Roosevelt's big stick or task dollar diplomacy. He doesn't agree with them. He thinks they're too interventionist. He wants to pull back from that and become a more, he wants to take a more isolationist stance. He fiddles around here and there, but really he wants to pull the U.S. interest back to the U.S. So he pulls money out of China, the investments that we had there and so forth. He pulls those out because he doesn't want to be involved in that whole tearing apart of China anymore. He also appeases the Japanese. There was this whole issue in Japan where the Japanese were having a really hard time buying land. They were being discriminated against, and so he appeases the Japanese and requires that land sales in California be non-discriminatory towards Japanese immigrants. He's also going to send the Marines into Haiti, and he does this sort of hesitantly, but he has to do it because literally the president of Haiti was killed and was like torn apart by this mad mob. So he has to send the Marines into Haiti to sort of quell that whole debacle that was going on there. He also sends them into the Dominican Republic to protect Americans that were living there. So he does send the Marines here and there to sort of protect American interests, but he does it with much hesitation. He's going to purchase the Virgin Islands, and aren't we glad he did, from Denmark, which has been a great destination source for Americans who want to travel to the Caribbean. Now, in Mexico was a mess. The United States had made a tremendous amount of money over the years from oil and natural resources, and anything we could basically grab from Mexico and use, we were doing it. And we made a lot of money over the years from Mexico. However, the Mexicans themselves remained relatively poor and illiterate and uneducated, and they were really suffering. And so the Mexicans revolt against their president. And they install a guy named General Huerta. He's going to take over after the president is assassinated. General Huerta is a full-blooded Native American who has no love for the United States whatsoever. And we don't like that he's in power. Between the early 1900s and 1930, over 1 million Mexicans would immigrate to the United States. Now, that number is probably really low compared to today, but in that time, that was a really high number. And Americans are going to call for intervention. Enough is enough. We don't want Mexicans coming into the United States anymore. Close the border. Of course, they didn't have that kind of resources back then. Still don't have them today. And the closing of the border was not going to be possible back in those days. It just isn't going to happen. So Americans are calling for intervention. So Wilson arranges this covert arms deal with Mexico, with a couple of rebels in Mexico named Venustiano Carranza and Francisco Pancho Villa. You probably know him better as Pancho Villa. So Carranza and Villa are going to benefit from the United States sort of sending them guns under the table. We don't really let anybody know about it, but we want Huerta overthrown. We don't want him in power anymore. Okay? Now, finally, Carranza is able to take over the presidency, and he and Pancho Villa were competitors for that. And Carranza is installed as the president of Mexico, and Pancho Villa is not happy. He becomes Carranza's basically his chief rival. And Pancho Villa was sort of a mix between a complete bandit and Robin Hood. So he wanted to see the best for Mexico, but he went about it in such horribly lousy ways that it doesn't work out. From January to March of 1916, there are basically two invasions here. One is in January, one is in March. And this is all during World War I in Europe. World War I is raging in Europe, and here we are fighting the Mexicans off. So just to get your timeline, your chronology correct, that's what's happening here. Villa and his gang of merry men are going to invade the United States twice, and they're going to kill over 30 U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. That's a big deal, okay? He's basically a terrorist. So General John J. Pershing also becomes known as Blackjack Pershing. He's the one that's going to lead the American GIs over in World War I. General John Pershing is sent by Wilson to quell this revolt by Villa and put him back in his place. So he's sent to break up Villa's gang. Now, he does that, but it takes him many, many months of chasing Villa all over the desert Southwest, and he doesn't ever capture Pancho Villa. Pancho Villa is like this master escape artist who keeps evading U.S. capture. So, back over in Europe, we have World War I going on. Now, the major causes of World War I, imperialism, competition, and jealousy among those European countries to take over the markets of lesser-known countries in Africa and in Asia. So that imperialism causes a lot of friction. Militarism, the arms race that is raging between especially Great Britain and Germany. Both of these countries have become basically industrial powerhouses, and there's an arms race about who has the better, the biggest, the most deadly weapons on the planet. Aggressive nationalism, this is nationalism gone bad. So nationalism is that pride in your country, 4th of July, St. Patrick's Day, whatever it is, Cinco de Mayo, that we celebrate to celebrate our heritage and our culture. Aggressive nationalism is that attitude gone wrong, where you begin to think that your culture is better than another, and it becomes a very a defensible thing that, if you want to go to war over this, we can do it. That kind of attitude. And that's what happens in Europe, is you have this aggressive nationalism between especially the Germans and the French. And particularly along the Balkan Peninsula, that powder keg of Europe, the Ottoman Empire gets involved, which is current-day Turkey. And that nationalism, this sense of pride that these folks have about their culture, is really going to sort of get in the way of their wisdom when it comes to finding peace. And then alliances, and you have three distinct alliances that fall out here: the Pan-Slavism Alliance, the Triple Entente, and the Triple Alliance. And the problem with those alliances is that they are mostly secret alliances, which means that when the chips start to fall, when the war breaks out, other countries get involved because they are in these alliances, and that is dangerous. Now, the assassination of the Archduke. This is the final flame, the spark that starts the war. It happens on June 28th, 1914, so right at the end of June. July is going to be a very precarious month in Europe because that's when they all start taking sides because they figure out that they're going to war. So June 28th, 1914 is when this happens. It happens in Serbia, in the capital city of Sarajevo. Serbia had declared their independence from Austria-Hungary, but Austria-Hungary had still sent some troops in there a couple of years after their independence to drill, to practice in the mountains, and the Archduke shows up to oversee this drilling. The problem here is that the Black Hand, this ultra-nationalistic group of Serbs, finds out that the Archduke is coming, and they decide they're going to take him out. They don't appreciate that he's there on their Independence Day, and they decide that they're going to do something about it. So the Black Hand, which consists of about a half a dozen guys who are ultra-nationalistic, they get together and they formulate this plot to take out the Archduke. The Archduke rolls into town in a convertible. His wife, who is about 7 months pregnant, is with him, Sophia, and they ride through town, and a couple of explosives, what we would call IEDs today, a couple of explosives are thrown at the car. One of them hits the car, bounces off. One lands in the car, and the Archduke kind of tosses it out. But one of those bombs kind of rolls along the gutter of the street, and it blows up behind the car, and one of the Archduke's guards is killed as a result. So the Archduke tells his driver, he says, all right, that's, I've seen about enough of this. I don't want to take any chances. Let's just roll on to lunch, and then I'll go to the drilling grounds after that. We're not going to do this whole parade thing anymore. So the driver speeds up, takes him to lunch. They have this huge reception in Sarajevo, and the Black Hand, the members of the Black Hand who were sort of waiting along the parade route to kill him, they sort of give up. Okay, so the parade's not happening. I guess we're done now. It's after lunch that the Archduke gets back in his convertible and he heads back through town, and he drives by basically a deli, and Gavrilo Princip happens to be there getting lunch. He's waiting in line. He's kind of standing out on the curb, like waiting for his turn. And here comes the Archduke. And he turns around and he sees his chance. He takes a revolver out of his coat, at point blank, steps off the curb, point blank range, points the gun at the Archduke, fires, hits him in the chest, shoots Sophia as well. She dies instantaneously. The Archduke's going to linger for a little while. He really is upset about his wife being killed because she's pregnant with their child. And so that's how that all plays out. Now, what happens next? Next, Austria-Hungary's really upset because the Serbian nationalists, this Black Hand group, had taken out the heir apparent to the throne. He was due to take over Austria-Hungary, and they killed him. Ick. So Austria-Hungary issues an ultimatum. You will either do these things or else we're going to declare war on you. And Austria-Hungary says they want to run the investigation into who shot the Archduke. Now, Gavrilo Princip had been arrested pretty much right away. He was in jail along with several of his cronies. They were all in jail. A couple of them are sentenced to death. Gavrilo Princip was only 19 years old. He gets about a 20-year sentence, but he would die in jail from tuberculosis. So he, the Serbians had that under control, but Austria-Hungary says, no, we're taking over. Serbia doesn't like that at all. We're an independent sovereign country and you're going to take over? So Serbia also must suppress all anti-Austria-Hungary propaganda. There could be nothing printed, nothing said, nothing written negative about Austria-Hungary. They wanted it all squashed. And Serbia's kind of like, really? Freedom of the press? Nothing? Okay. So Serbia also has to hunt down and eliminate all terrorist groups, not just the Black Hand, but everybody who might be considered a terrorist. Serbia says, go jump in a lake. We're not doing that. They refuse to accept the terms. Remember, this is an ultimatum, and Austria-Hungary declares war on them. The war is on, and the dominoes for the alliances start to fall into place. We'll do that next.